you basically have inflation because of monetary policies that are loose, but equally important are fiscal policies by the government. In other words, when the government spends too much money and doesn't collect enough in taxes and in fees and so forth, you have a fiscal deficit, a budget deficit. And the budget deficit is essentially excessive spending by the government. But instead of increasing taxation or cutting spending, the government then goes and borrows money. As a result of that, the government debt goes up. And in time, I mean, not immediately, but in time, the increased interest payments on the debt by the government retards economic growth. What also retards economic growth is the expansion of the government. The government is unproductive. The productive sector is the private sector, the personal, the individual initiative, and not the government. And so you have essentially a slowdown in economic growth and a pickup in inflation. And this is happening at the present time. And I'm afraid that the pickup in inflation and in the fiscal deficits is actually brought about, especially in democracies, because in democracies, all the measures that lead to inflation, namely, the people say the government should do this, the government should help here, the government should subsidize here, the government should enact tax cuts, and so forth and so on. All the measures that lead to inflation are actually very popular politically seen. You understand? And what is unpopular, namely tightening the belt, increasing taxation, and so forth, that the public doesn't want. So in a democracy, people essentially punish themselves. They don't realize it, but they punish themselves, the majority. In Europe, we have, in addition to all this, we have incompetent politicians that are from the Green Party and very left-wing politicians that are not interested in economic growth, but are driven by policies of envy and essentially destroying accumulated wealth by the wealthy people. This is one of the tenets of the Marxist socialist ideology. You bring down wealth. You take wealth away from the rich because these are perceived as pigs, and you try to redistribute it, usually not to the people, but to the politicians. That is essentially the socialist ideology. And then we have in Europe, even more so than in the US, this absurd immigration policy where entire regions in Germany, France, Italy, and so forth, they're controlled by immigrants, mostly refugees. And they are, there are many books that have been written about immigration. Say, in the 19th century, why did people move to America? The American population was 4 million in 1800 and 80 million in 1900. Why did people move to America? Because social conditions were far better in America than in Europe. And so they moved there and they were prepared to work and hustle and essentially build the future. But today's refugees, so I'm not saying everyone, but most of them, they come because of social security contributions that they can get and advantages that they can get. And in most cases in Europe, I haven't calculated it in the US, but in Europe, the refugees cost a lot of money for the government. and certainly in the first few years, and I suppose also in the years thereafter.
Yeah.
But we have to distinguish. It's like I mentioned in the introduction, the economies in Europe are not doing well, but the stock markets have actually done rather well.